Lifted Drinks. Join the party, skip the hangover. Created by hemp and cannabis lovers, Lifted is an amazing, tasty, non-alcoholic beverage created to improve any evening in or weekend out. Lifted is 100% hemp cannabis, 100% consistent, 100% of the time. We could ship anywhere in the U.S. Just add ice or mix it with your favorite beverage. Check them out at lifteddrinks.com. That's LYFTED drinks.com. Enter in radio to get a 20% discount at checkout. You must be 21 or over to join the party and skip the hangover. Lifted Drinks. Join the party, skip the hangover. Created by hemp and cannabis lovers, Lifted is an amazing, tasty, non-alcoholic beverage created to improve any evening in or weekend out. Lifted is 100% hemp cannabis, 100% consistent, 100% of the time. We could ship anywhere in the U.S. Just add ice or mix it with your favorite beverage. Check them out at lifteddrinks.com. That's LYFTED drinks.com. Enter in radio to get a 20% discount at checkout. You must be 21 or over to join the party and skip the hangover.
It's only entertainment.
Live from Newark, New Jersey, also the place of birth of myself, Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. This is Green Rush Live, another Friday afternoon business of cannabis talk show that we do every single Friday live on the Pro Cannabis Media Network on all of those social media platforms out there. You know, your YouTube, your Facebooks, your LinkedIn Live, and of course our Roku channel, PCM TV, and our Apple channel, PCM TV. I'm at the Athletes in Cannabis Conference here in Newark, New Jersey. And earlier, when they had their little breakout session with some of the athletes, I actually met an old friend, if you will, former #1 draft pick of the New England Patriots, Dominique Easley is here. And Reggie Grant, who is one of the co-founders of the Athletes in Cannabis Conference, along with Jeff Walter, was also in on this little breakout session, and they all talked about their cannabis stories, coming out of the cannabis closet, getting away from opioids, and also how to get into the business. And that was the opening discussion, the opening breakout room that I took part in earlier today. Now, I'll be back here tomorrow, and I'll do some interviews with some of the vendors here. But as you can tell, I'm actually at a very special booth at the Most Cannabis Group booth. And Claudia Post happens to be right with us. Say hi, Claudia.
Hi, Claudia.
I knew she'd do that. And Claudia, like Josh and like Rick, are both correspondents for We Talk News, which, as you know, always follows this Green Rush Live show at about 6 o'clock. So rather than going back and forth with Rick and Josh, I'm just going to wrap this baby up, and I'm going to say, take it away. And I know both you guys will do a great job. Rick Thompson, Josh Kincaid, I'm not going to sign off. Reporting live from Newark, New Jersey, I'm Jimmy Young. Back to you, Rick and Josh.
Welcome to the Green Rush, the business of cannabis. Wasn't that a fun little intro from our founder, Jimmy Young, there in New Jersey? The Green Rush is, of course, a 2-hour weekly live cannabis business talk show produced by Pro Cannabis Media. We broadcast every Friday from 4 to 6. We discuss news, issues in the cannabis market, and every week we conduct a deep dive into specific topics of the industry. Today's subject, athletes in cannabis. I'm Rick Thompson, and I'm joined by Josh Kincaid. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Rick.
Josh, tell people a little bit about yourself as we introduction.
Start with my own podcast, The Talking Hedges Cannabis Business Podcast, but been in the cannabis industry for a little over 9 years. But actually, as an athlete myself, I was injured, was supposed to go play college football, couldn't do it. Recently had surgery just this last August, still going with the same issue, same problem. So interested to see, from these athletes today, like Anna, how she uses cannabinoids, for example, and if it was able to maybe extend her career, and maybe I can learn a little bit from her.
Fantastic. By way of introduction, I'm Rick Thompson. I'm currently the executive director of the Michigan chapter of the National Association for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, but I'm also on the board of the Redemption Foundation, Michigan Cannabis Freedom Coalition, and I own the Michigan Cannabis Business Development Group too. Plus I co-host Jazz Cabbage Cafe and several other broadcasts here from where I'm at in Michigan. And we were very happy at the Green Rush to be able to offer for you today as our first guest, Anna Symonds. Anna is the program manager at the Etheridge Foundation, a board member for Athletes for Care. And as Josh mentioned, she is a professional athlete herself. Anna, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I just want to, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My last name is Symonds. It rhymes with diamonds. I always had to tell the announcers that so they could remember because everyone wants to say Simmons, but thanks for having me on.
I think Dan French wanted me to look bad, so he didn't tell me that in advance. Thank you, Anna. I appreciate your tolerance for my badness.
It's common.
So tell us a little bit about the Etheridge Foundation.
The Etheridge Foundation is a nonprofit founded by the legendary musician Melissa Etheridge. And our mission is to support research into plant-based and nature-based medicines for opioid use disorder. And so it's a pretty specific purpose. Sadly, the foundation was created because Melissa lost her son to opioids almost 2 years ago. And so in response, she had this outpouring of support from fans, and she wanted to change the system because we know that conventional treatments are not working for so many people. We need more tools in the toolbox, and we need more effective tools that treat the whole person and the root causes. So I'm really excited to be doing that work on behalf of the foundation.
Well, we did mention that you're a professional athlete with the USA Rugby Women's Premier League, but talk about Athletes for Care for just a moment, if you would, please.
Sure. Yes. Athletes for Care is another nonprofit that I'm involved with. I've been an athlete ambassador for 4 years or so, 5, and then am now on the board as well. And so what that CARE stands for is Community, Advocacy, Research, and Education. And so this is a community for mostly retired professional athletes to come together and advocate, educate the public, and support research into, again, plant medicines for our wellness and for the good of all. And so it really originally started with some athletes who wanted to spread the message about cannabis and who said, now that I'm retired, I want to go out there and tell the truth about what is helping my wellness. And so many people really wanted to share the positive transformations they'd had when they were able to begin using cannabis as part of their therapeutic regimen, and for, that to be our right to use the medicine of our choice, that it's effective, has low side effects, etc. And so we joined our voices together, and we're pretty active in activism and all kinds of events.
Now, I'm going to ask you about your use of cannabis and cannabinoids during your playing time. And I know Josh has some questions also too, but during your professional days, was there a time when you turned to cannabis medicines for treatment for the various illnesses that you suffered?
For sure. And I just want to add one little side note here. The Women's Premier League is still in the process of fully professionalizing. Women's rugby in the US is in the fight to, side note here, the women's get the funding that it needs to be really, we're kind of where women's soccer was 20 years ago. So we're playing at the top level. We're expected to perform. And yet we're still working all that. And the league is in the midst of a big investment round right now. If anyone's interested, you should go check that out. But so that said, luckily the league has never subjected us to drug testing. There is, if you want to play for the national team, there's some restrictions there. And there's also discrimination if they know you're a cannabis user. But for me, I always used cannabis with the more of the recreational mindset since I was a teenager. And of course, in sports, it was so strongly discouraged as like, that's a drug. You're harming yourself and your body. And but drinking was always fully accepted and embraced. And that was always a bit weird. And it got weirder as I got older. And I was like, wait a minute. I've used pot. It's really not, anything like the things that you see with alcohol. And so as I got older and I struggled more with the pains that don't go away, you have injuries that never go back to how they were before. And recovery and all those things, I began to use cannabis more strategically for things like sleep and pain management and particular injuries. I hurt my back in 2013. And so that's when I really got smarter about it and more, really more therapeutically targeted.
Josh, go ahead if you had some questions.
I was just curious about how athletes can deal with it now. I mean, knowing it's sort of like, CBD was that gateway. Now everybody knows. They've maybe gone to THC or some kind of 1-to-1 ratio. If women, for example, are playing in that rugby Premier League and maybe they get invited to the National League or maybe the Olympics, is rugby in the Olympics? I don't
Yes, Rugby Sevens is in the Olympics. Yeah.
How are then you able to continue to use that as medication if there's such a bias on that? You can't. I mean, if they even know you're a spokesperson, I would imagine there's going to be some backlash.
Absolutely. I know a player who was in the national team pool from a cannabis legal state and was working in the industry, wasn't even an outspoken advocate or anything, but had a job in the cannabis industry. And they told her, well, it's the team or your job. You can't work there and be on this team. And so she chose her job, which good for her, but that's really hard to walk away from that because for most players, that's the pinnacle to play for your country, in our sport in rugby. And so, so it is hard. And I've connected with the national team staff before and offered to provide education about CBD in particular, because it could be helping our athletes so much with way fewer side effects than some of these other prescription things. And this was a few years ago, but I got like, no, thanks, we're not interested. And their blanket policy is we don't let the athletes use CBD because it could be contaminated with THC. And products aren't reliable. And the thing is, because they're drug tested, they go by WADA standards. It wouldn't be a good thing to have a positive test. It would affect the whole team. It's not good. I understand they can't risk it, but at the same time, it's a really, closed-minded and it's really outdated way of looking at medicine and wellness. And performance. And so it just underscores why we need to change the rules with WADA and why Athletes for Care has been advocating for that for several years now.
Could you explain what WADA is real quick? I know you mentioned it several times.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's the World Anti-Doping Agency. And then they set the policies for various states, like USADA is the US Anti-Doping Agency, and different countries, different leagues.
Thank you.
Yeah, you still have the MLB and National Hockey League that don't really test all that much for cannabis. And you see Melissa Etheridge on the cover of Dope magazine a couple of years ago, no real negative pushback or criticism for that. At what point will the major leagues for football, for example, when will the National Football League stop drug testing, and when will it just be normalized like CBD? I know Athletes for Care. I'm familiar with them in the Panther group, and a lot of athletes within there. They're all waiting patiently. No one's holding their breath though. So where's the hurdle, and when is the solution?
Well, my understanding of the NFL and from what I've heard from retired players, is that they are just a very combative employer. Mm-hmm. So for them, it's all about the contract. And if they know there's something that players want, they're going to demand concessions. It doesn't matter about is this right or wrong? Is this best for people's health? It's a business deal. And so, and I mean, the UFC would be similar, other leagues. But with the NFL in particular, it's been this sticking point, and really that it's going to come down to some kind of trade-offs, some kind of, it's a business deal for them. They might talk about player welfare and health, but I don't know if anyone really believes that. So I'm pretty skeptical of that. That's any kind of motivation for them. That's more of a window dressing for their interests.
Mm-hmm.
Ownership versus the players union is a familiar confrontation that we've seen in sports all the time. And unfortunately, the health and wellness of the athlete sometimes does become one of those bargaining chips that ownership uses in order to, like you said, gain concessions during contract negotiations from the players. Major League Baseball just had a lockout this year. These are never amicable relationships. And when you throw in something as controversial as cannabis medicines, then it just becomes even more of a confrontation.
Yeah.
So,
Anna, I'm curious, would you still be playing? Do you think, would it have extended your career? I'm taking a poll today.
So it did extend my career. I retired last year at the age of 40. So I got some really good years I got 20 years career. And I think that's pretty good. You don't see too many other players. And then especially when you're running around against 18-year-olds and stuff, it's pretty exhausting. So you really, but cannabis absolutely extended my career and my level of performance because it gave me a pain management solution that was gentle and anti-inflammatory without negative side effects, with only positive ones that sort of supported my overall wellness. For me, that was like really crucial in being able to get, especially those last few good years of playing.
My niece played rugby for Colgate, so I know exactly how, and that was just a couple of years. You've got 20 years in the industry. Good for you. Good for you. What is your preferred method of treatment? Oftentimes topicals are taken, but sometimes people try to treat the entire body with ingestibles. What's your method of treatment?
Yeah, I use a variety of things, but for like right after a game or practice, I'm usually smoking flower. And I'm really particular about the source, knowing it's organically grown and who grew it and those kinds of things. But for me, it's reliable, it's effective, it's predictable, and it offers that relief. And I don't need like a tremendous amount. And that's the other good thing about smoking is you can feel, quickly when you reach the level that you need for muscle relaxation, pain relief, all those things. But that said, I do also use topicals. I will use ingestibles like edible type products, tinctures. I think that, topicals can be really great for sort of some localized relief. But if you really want that like systemic anti-inflammatory effect, you have to take something in, that'll go throughout your body and your bloodstream. So really, I kind of just depends on my needs. A little of everything.
Beautiful to have a variety of products available to satisfy whatever you need, right?
Absolutely.
In what state do you normally acquire your cannabis?
Well, I lived in Oregon for many years, and that's where I played rugby. But then I moved to Hawaii. So I am now we only have medical cannabis here. So I am a medical card holder here in the state.
Do you find it better? I know you talked about organic cultivation and being able to trust the source. Do you find that the regulated marketplace satisfies your needs, or do you go to a more personalized relationship with a specific grower that you're familiar with?
In Oregon, there is it's a wonderful, sophisticated market because there's been a medical cannabis market since the mid 90s. And so it's a mature industry or segment, of wellness, and people have reputations. It's developed, products are very good, very high quality, versus I think out here, I think a personalized approach is maybe a little better because there are so many restrictions. The laws here aren't very good. There's a limited number of suppliers, and you are only allowed to grow indoors, which is crazy here because the climate is wonderful, the sun is powerful, and electricity is very expensive. So then you're growing, and you need so much HVAC for the humidity. So, I mean, out here, it's a different beast, but in Oregon, I still have, I still have my favorite farms and growers over there.
You'd imagine that being closer to the equatorial region, Hawaii's light spectrum would be just so advantageous to cultivating cannabis. I mean, almost everything else grows wonderfully in Hawaii. So,
well, it does. And I think there's a lot of off-grid cultivation here, but their regulatory system is very, they use that law enforcement argument where, well, if we let people grow it outside, then what's going to happen? They'll just be growing it outside. Well, they're already doing that, and they've been doing that for decades. And, I mean, there's a reason. There's classic varieties that come from here, but, it's a work in progress.
I was expecting easy access in Maui for a wedding about 5 or 6 years ago. And I went up to some random people and asked them if they had some. And they asked me if I was, the feds or cops or whatever, like, nope, just looking for Maui Wowie or whatever's out here. So it's very kind of conservative. Not like Seattle where you just assume everybody smokes. Question for you, Anna, though, when you were in the locker room, did you ever advocate or hear other people talk about alternative pain management? And was cannabis sort of like verbally passed around, or how did other people manage their pain?
Yeah, well, our team, my team, ORSU, the Oregon team, we're very cannabis friendly. Coming out of Portland, Oregon, we have multiple people on the team who work in the industry, who are very knowledgeable, and we have a lot of connoisseurs as well, people who enjoy cannabis and people who definitely use cannabis therapeutically. And so we're kind of on the edge of things that way. And then maybe the California teams are behind us. But on our team, it's a lot of the team leadership, the senior players are part of that cohort. So we really set the tone. There isn't, a new coach comes in and we're like, hey, this is the way it is, so don't try to change that. And that's been really positive for us. Part of the culture of our team is that we are educated on plant medicine and on cannabis. But for other teams, they're not necessarily. And I think our team has a reputation for it, and other teams will seek us out. We know who the people are on the other teams who like cannabis and use it, and they come hang out with us after the game. And so we've, after the national championships in 2016, I remember one of the MVP type players from the team who won the national championship that year sought us out for the post-game pain relief, but was like, I got to keep this quiet.
I just love the thought that you'd sit the coach down, lay a dab rig on the table and say, look, here's how we're going to give. This is how it's going to be, sir.
It's not quite to that level, but it is, we're pretty, our league was really grown. It was player created. And, back in 2010, I think 2009. And so, I mean, we really are the drivers of the organizations.
I think that's really a huge advantage, right? Being a player created league as opposed to being a billionaire created league where they want to micromanage and control every single thing. And you have rules that are coming from the bottom up as opposed from the top down, right?
It is a double-edged sword. I mean, each team has their own culture, and we are a very player-led team. It's just, it's the double-edged sword of not having a lot of resources. So on the plus side, you get to set the tone and make some of these decisions, you as the team. But then on the other side of things, not having the money, having to constantly fundraise. Or a nonprofit organization. It's just a lot on top of playing and performing.
I'd love to see a team come out with, tie-dyed uniforms, just running around that.
I would love that too. Actually, our team, I think, we were definitely the first in the league. We had a couple sets of jerseys that are sponsored by, we have a cannabis farm that sponsored a summer set of jerseys, and a topical company that did another set. So we're actually wearing those logos on the field.
That's great. You know,
So Hawaii market now, is it kind of uniform across all islands? Because I'm curious, we have one of the larger, I'm in Washington State, we have one of the larger ferry systems in the world. You can't, like in Alaska, there's issues with all the island chains and air, with the FAA. So there's a lot of regulatory issues where you're at. How do people get their cannabis, and what's the scene look like?
So the scene is pretty restricted. They limit the number of licenses for growers and dispensaries quite a bit. So some islands, there's like 1 or 2 dispensaries on the whole island, generally speaking, for most of the islands. And then as far as travel, that's a tricky one. I think I read something about this and I promptly forgot it, but it was like, you're within the state, so it should be legal for you to fly, but then that's still federal airspace. It's federal facilities when you go in the airport, so that's not legal. And I think the upshot was like, it should be legal because it's within the state, but it's not technically legal, so it's discouraged. I think people make their own personal choices about that kind of thing.
So really, it comes up to the individual entrepreneur's tolerance, right? Or their willingness to support our industry, right?
As far as, on the commercial level, I think maybe you have to have your grow facility on an island and sell it all there, or maybe you would have to take it by boat, but that seems wild because the islands are not that far apart, but the water in the channels between them is like notoriously rough. So
I think that's also covered by federal, because we have water here, like the Puget Sound. We were going to do cannabis cruises, and then that's also covered by the U.S. Coast Guard.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I actually haven't delved that far, but I think unless they have they've worked something out with the feds commercially, which I wouldn't imagine they did, because we know the federal government doesn't care about the cannabis industry. But yeah, so it's a very interesting place to be a consumer and a patient and in the industry.
You've participated in international sports as well. What's your experience been with athletes from other nations and their cannabis exposure?
Oh, it varies a lot. The stigma against cannabis is even stronger in some countries where you would think maybe they would know better. But for example, like Australia, cannabis is very stigmatized. It's treated like the same as meth legally, and it's regarded similarly, and it's like run by gangs and stuff. It's just, but they have medical cannabis, and it's slowly gaining a bit more traction and acceptance, but there is this widespread social stigma that this is a drug, and this is we don't talk about it, that's dangerous kind of thing. There's a lot of curiosity around it, and people do use it, but it's harder to access there. The quality is not as high from my experience, and then, even similar in New Zealand, although I would say more people are consuming there and the quality is probably higher. But it has the same kind of stigma that's had in the US, but even if you go back, some decades, they're a little behind on that. And it's not people's fault. It's just the result of all that propaganda that has been really pushed for decades.
Yeah, the war on drugs was an international phenomenon, not just an American thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. So what's your hope for the future of athletics and the integration of cannabis medicines? If you had your ideal scenario 5-10 years down the road, what would that look like?
Wow. This is my hopes and dreams. I want medicine to become more integrative, meaning like holistic, looking at the whole person. It's not just chemical inputs and outputs. It's looking at everything that's tied together with your physiological functioning. You can't separate your mental and emotional processes. And some people would argue, your spiritual aspects. These things are all inseparable, and yet our medicine treats them as separate things. And I think a lot of athletes are struggling with that. And we look at, say, mental health as this separate domain. Oh, I'm struggling with that. Well, that affects your physiological health and vice versa. And so if we open the gates, we need to legalize cannabis. We need to really invest in the research so that we're understanding the potential to help with the neuroprotection. Head injuries are a huge issue for so many sports, and brain health. So we're understanding how to protect and support our brains, and support our endocannabinoid system. So we're balanced, we're healthy, we're resilient. And I think so that underlying stress support systems, that supports all those domains, the mental, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual.
And we're just about out of time on this particular segment, but we'd like to invite you to stay for the next half an hour. Darren McCarty, who's a 4-time National Hockey League champion, will be on as well, too. And we're a little overdue for our break. Josh, did you have any final questions for Anna before we go to break?
Didn't. I thought it was a great segment. Hope she sticks around.
Fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us here at Green Rush Live.
Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.
I'm Joyce Gerber, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, The Canna Mom Show. And we are on a mission to enhance the impact women have on this industry as business professionals, healthcare providers, policy advocates, caregivers, moms, by sharing and preserving their stories of love and kindness, wisdom, and hope. I am so grateful to have found my tribe of Canna podcasters right here on PodConX, and look forward to our work of crushing the stigma around cannabis and caregivers and building this new industry together.